Hello, welcome back to the Phantom Diary channel. I'm sure there are many of you listening to my stories to fall asleep. Before we start, write in the comments what country you're listening from. If you feel fear, you should like and subscribe this channel. Let's go. I've always loved Alaska's wild beauty. The endless forests, towering mountains, and vast skies that seem to go on forever. When I got a chance to spend a week near Denali National Park, I jumped at it, eager for solitude and a break from city noise. The plan was simple. Hike deep into the wilderness, camp under the stars, and soak in the silence. But Alaska's wilderness has its own voice, and sometimes it whispers things you don't expect. On my third night in the forest, after a long day of hiking through spruce and pine, I made camp in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. The sky was clear and the air sharp and cold as the sun dipped below the horizon. I built a fire, cooked a simple meal, and settled in with my journal. As darkness fell, the forest around me seemed to lean closer, the shadows stretching long and thick. The crackle of the fire was the only sound until I heard it, a soft, low, whispering, barely audible over the wind. It didn't sound like the rustling of leaves or the whistle of the breeze. It was different, like voices, far away, carried on the air. I froze, listening. The whispers wove between the trees, rising and falling like the breath of the forest itself. I couldn't make out words, only tones, sad, urgent, and ancient. Curious and a little unnerved, I grabbed my flashlight and shone the beam into the woods. The tall pines stood silent, their dark trunks like sentinels. No sign of anything, or anyone. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but the feeling that I was being watched crept over me. The whispers continued, circling the camp in soft waves. Then I saw it, a faint flicker of light moving slowly between the trees, like a firefly, but larger and steadier. I stood up, heart pounding, and followed the light cautiously. It moved deeper, into the forest, disappearing and reappearing through the thick trunks and underbrush. After a few minutes, the light led me to a small, weathered cabin I hadn't noticed before. Its wood was gray and cracked with age, almost blending into the trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, but no windows were lit. The whispering was louder now, swirling around the cabin like a song. I called out softly, "Hello?" No answer, only the whispering voices that seemed to beckon me closer. Then, suddenly the door creaked open. I stepped back startled, but no one appeared in the doorway. Instead, a cold breeze brushed past me, carrying the scent of pine needles and something, faintly metallic like old blood. The whispers grew clearer, almost forming words. Help, lost. Remember. I blinked, trying to understand. Was this a plea? A warning? I looked around, searching for the source of the voices. Then I noticed a small, carved totem lying near the doorstep. It was rough-hewn, depicting a figure with hollow eyes and outstretched hands. I picked it up, and the whispers stopped instantly. The forest fell silent. I stared at the totem, feeling an odd weight in my hand, like it was alive with the memories of something long gone. Suddenly, a soft voice spoke right behind me, "Thank you." I spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. The moon was bright now, bathing the clearing in silver light. The cabin door slowly closed on its own, and the flickering light vanished. I didn't hesitate. I placed the totem gently on the doorstep and stepped back onto the path leading away from the cabin. The whispers returned, softer now, like a gentle sigh of relief, and I felt a strange peace settle over the forest. When I reached my campsite, the fire was still burning, the warmth welcoming. That night, I slept deeply, free from the forest's eerie watchfulness. The next morning, as I packed up, I glanced back toward where the cabin had stood, but the clearing was empty. No cabin, no totem, only the pines swaying quietly in the breeze. I never found the cabin again, but I carry the memory of those whispering voices and the strange calm that followed. Alaska's wilderness holds many secrets, and sometimes the spirits trapped in its shadows only want to be remembered and set free. Alaska in winter is a place unlike anywhere else on Earth. The days are short, the nights endless, and the cold seeps into your bones no matter how many layers you wear. I had heard the stories, tales of mysterious lights dancing in the sky, strange voices on the wind, and shadows that lurked just beyond the tree line. Still, nothing prepared me for what I experienced during my trip to the Denali wilderness. I'd come with two close friends, Jake and Mia, eager to escape the noise of the city and immerse ourselves in the wild. Our plan was simple: spend a week camping near a remote cabin, hike during the day, and watch the northern lights at night. The first few days were incredible. The forest was a quiet, frozen world of snow-laden spruce and silent, glassy lakes. We saw tracks of wolves and moose, and the night sky exploded with shimmering green and purple ribbons of aurora. On the fourth night, as we sat around the campfire, something changed. The aurora was brighter than ever, painting the sky with impossible colors. We were bundled in thick coats, roasting fish over the fire and sharing stories. Suddenly, the wind shifted, carrying a faint sound, almost like a whisper, through the trees. I stopped mid-sentence. "Did you guys hear that?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, like voices?" Mia looked uneasy. "It sounded like singing, but very faint." The singing grew clearer, but it wasn't melodic. It was more like a chorus of voices chanting softly, blending into the wind. "Maybe it's the old legends," I said, trying to sound casual. "They say the northern lights are spirits, dancing. Maybe they're trying to communicate." We joked nervously, but the unease settled deep in our chests. Suddenly, a flicker caught my eye beyond the tree line. A figure standing still, barely visible in the snowy darkness. It was tall and slender, wrapped in a cloak that shimmered like ice. "Look," I whispered, pointing. Jake grabbed his flashlight and shone it toward the figure, but it was gone. We scanned the trees, but nothing moved. "Probably an animal," Mia said, though her voice was shaky. As the night deepened, the chanting voices seemed to circle us, rising and falling with the wind. The fire flickered, casting long shadows. That twisted unnaturally. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched. We decided to head into the cabin to escape the cold and strange atmosphere. Inside, the warmth was comforting, but the silence was heavy. We huddled near the fireplace, and I tried to focus on normal things: hot tea, the crackling fire, the snow falling softly outside. Then the whispering started again, this time just outside the cabin window. I peered out into the night. The snow lay thick and undisturbed. No footprints, no movement, just the aurora swirling overhead. The voices grew louder, but instead of fear, I felt something else. Sadness. A sorrow so deep it almost felt tangible. Jake spoke quietly. "Maybe it's the spirits of those lost, in the wilderness, trying to tell their stories." We sat in silence, listening as the voices faded with the dawn. The next morning, the forest seemed normal again. Still, quiet, but without the eerie chorus. The figure we'd seen was never found, and no trace of it remained. We left the cabin that day with heavy hearts but safe bodies, carrying with us the memory of that haunting night beneath the northern lights. Sometimes, when I think back, I wonder if the spirits are still out there, whispering their ancient songs through the wind, waiting for someone to listen. I had always been drawn to Alaska's wildness, the endless forests, towering mountains, and the cold, clear air that made every breath feel sharp and alive. When my friend Jake invited me on a camping trip near Denali National Park, I didn't hesitate. I was eager for adventure, and Alaska promised that in spades. We arrived in the early afternoon, unloading gear at a small remote campground surrounded by dense pine forests. The trees were ancient, their needles whispering softly in the wind. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and planned a short hike before nightfall. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the forest seemed to grow quieter. Not the peaceful silence of nature, but an unsettling hush, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that twisted between trunks like grasping hands. Jake joked nervously about the spirit of the forest, watching us, but even he seemed tense. When we returned to camp, the sky was streaked with orange and purple. We built a fire and sat close, savoring the warmth against the creeping chill. That's when the whispering started. At first, it was faint, like the rustling of pine needles in a soft breeze. But as night deepened, the whispers grew clearer, almost like voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. The sound seemed to come from all directions, weaving between the trees and circling our campsite. "Do you hear that?" I asked Jake, voice low. He nodded, eyes scanning the shadows. "It's probably just the wind." But it didn't sound like the wind. It sounded deliberate. The fire flickered violently, then dimmed as a sudden gust swept through the clearing. The whispering turned into a chorus of murmurs, layered and overlapping, urgent, mournful, almost pleading. A figure appeared just beyond the firelight, a tall silhouette wrapped in furs, face hidden beneath a heavy hood. I froze. Jake grabbed my arm. "Stay calm," he whispered. The figure didn't move closer. Instead, it raised a hand and pointed deeper into the forest, toward a narrow trail barely visible in the moonlight. I wanted to ask who or what it was, but the words caught in my throat. The figure slowly vanished into the darkness. Jake and I exchanged glances, uncertainty and curiosity battling in our minds. "Should we follow it?" I asked. "Maybe it's a ranger or someone who knows these woods," Jake replied. "Let's just check it out, but carefully." We grabbed our flashlights and headed toward the trail. The forest seemed alive around us. Shadows flickering, branches creaking, and the whispering still echoing softly. As we walked, the trail led us to a small clearing with an old stone circle. In the center stood a weathered wooden totem, carved, with faces twisted in expressions of fear and sorrow. The whispering grew louder here, almost like chanting. Suddenly, the cold hit me. Not the kind of cold that comes from the air, but a bone-deep chill, like something unseen brushing against my skin. I shivered and looked around. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches creaking as if sighing. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to the totem. "It's some kind of ancient marker." The whispers paused. Then a single voice rose above them. A woman's voice, clear and haunting. "Leave this place before the night claims you," she said softly. I felt a strange calm amid the fear, as if the forest wasn't angry, but protective. We didn't argue. Turning back, we hurried down the trail, the whispering fading behind us. Back at camp, the fire roared to life as if no time had passed. The figure never returned, and the forest's eerie silence settled back into peaceful night sounds. The next day, at the visitor center, I asked about the stone circle and the voices. An elder ranger told me the land belonged to the Dena'ina people, who believed spirits guarded the forests and mountains. The totems marked sacred spots, warning travelers to respect the wild. I left Denali with a new respect for the land and its unseen guardians. The whispering pines had reminded me that some places are alive in ways we don't fully understand, watching, warning, but never harming those who listen. I had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights, those shimmering curtains of green and purple dancing across the Arctic sky. So, when I was invited to join a small research group in rural Alaska during the long winter, I didn't hesitate. We were a mix of scientists and locals, stationed in a remote cabin miles from the nearest town. surrounded by dense spruce forests and endless snowfields. The cabin was rustic but warm, with a wood stove crackling and casting shadows on the walls. Outside, the world was silent except for the occasional howl of distant wolves. The first few days passed uneventfully. We studied animal tracks in the snow, measured ice thickness, and marveled at the spectacular auroras. At night, the sky was alive, swirling and pulsing with colors unlike anything I'd ever seen. But then the strange things began. One evening, as the northern lights pulsed overhead like silent thunder, I stepped outside alone to take photos. The cold bit sharply at my cheeks, and the snow crunched under my boots. Suddenly, I heard it. Faint whispers carried on the wind. At first, I thought it was the wind whistling through the trees, but the whispers were too clear, too deliberate. Words, or something like words, reached my ears. Soft, urgent, unintelligible, but haunting. I scanned the dark forest around me, heart pounding. The auroras flickered, casting eerie green shadows between the trees. I couldn't see anyone. Back inside the cabin, I told the others, but they laughed it off as the wind playing. Tricks on me. Maybe I was just tired, or the isolation was getting to me. The next night, the whispers returned, louder this time, weaving through the icy air like a cold breath on my neck. I wasn't alone. I felt eyes watching me from the darkness beyond. The trees. I followed the whispers, stepping carefully through the snow toward the forest edge. There, just beyond the tree line, I glimpsed something unusual. A faint glow, not from the aurora, but from a cluster of small lights hovering low among the trees. I called to the others, and together we approached cautiously. The lights flickered and shifted, like will-o'-the-wisps, but colder and more unnatural. Then we saw it. A figure standing silently among the pines, pale and translucent, shimmering faintly in the northern glow. Its face was blurred, features shifting like a reflection on water. It raised a hand slowly, pointing toward the forest depths. We hesitated, but curiosity overcame fear. The figure didn't speak, but seemed to beckon us to follow. We ventured deeper into the woods, the snow muffling our footsteps. The whispers surrounded us, a chorus of voices speaking in an ancient tongue I couldn't understand. The figure glided, ahead, its glow lighting our path. Eventually, we arrived at a frozen lake, the surface smooth and glassy beneath the shimmering sky. The figure stopped at the shore, then slowly sank beneath the ice, disappearing without a sound. The whispers ceased. We stood in stunned silence, the auroras reflecting on the ice like ghostly flames. No one spoke as we made our way back to the cabin. The next morning, the forest was calm and silent, the strange lights and whispers gone. Later, a local elder told us the story of the spirit of the aurora, a guardian of the northern lights who appears to those lost or in need, guiding them safely or warning them of hidden dangers. I never saw the figure again, but whenever I hear the whispering wind or see the dancing lights above the trees, I remember that night when the forest and sky spoke to me and the spirit watched silently beneath the northern lights. I never imagined Alaska could feel so lonely. I grew up in a bustling city where the noise of traffic, people, and life never really fades. But when I decided to spend a week alone in a remote cabin deep in the Alaskan wilderness, I craved silence. Real silence, the kind that seeps into your bones. The cabin was miles off the grid, surrounded by towering pines and snow-covered hills. No roads, no neighbors, just endless forest. The kind of place where your own breath sounds loud in the cold air. The first few days were peaceful. I spent my time hiking, reading by the wood, stove, and marveling at the northern lights painting the sky with ribbons of green and purple. But on the third night, everything changed. It began with the silence, not the quiet kind, but a heavy, unnatural silence that pressed down on the forest. The usual sounds of night, The hoot of owls, the rustle of branches, the distant howl of wolves, all stopped. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. I was sitting by the fire when I noticed it. The trees just beyond the cabin, standing motionless and dark against the moonlight. Then I realized they weren't just still. They seemed waiting. Sudden chills swept through the cabin despite the fire. I looked outside and saw nothing but shadows. But then, at the edge of the clearing, I caught a glimpse of something moving. A figure. Tall, thin, cloaked in darkness, standing perfectly still between the trees. I blinked, but it didn't vanish. Its shape was vaguely human, but the way it moved, or rather, didn't move, felt unnatural. It was watching. My heart thudded. I called out softly, "Hello?" No answer, just that eerie silence. I stepped outside, the snow crunching underfoot. The figure remained, unmoving. I raised my flashlight and swept the beam across the clearing. The light caught a pale face, eyes reflecting a cold blue glow that pierced the darkness. I froze. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if curious but not hostile. A voice, barely more than a whisper, floated on the frigid air. "You're not meant to be here." I swallowed hard. "I'm just visiting." The figure didn't respond, only faded slowly into the shadows between the trees. Back inside, I locked the door and sat by the fire, trying to shake off the cold dread settling over me. That night, sleep was impossible. I kept hearing footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. Each time I dared to look out the window, there was nothing but dark pines. The next day, I tried to dismiss it as exhaustion or imagination, but the silence returned that evening. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive stillness. Then, as twilight deepened, the figure appeared again, this time closer, standing right at the edge of the porch. I didn't run or scream. Something about its presence was unsettling, yet calm, like a guardian more than a threat. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. The figure's eyes glowed brighter. "A watcher of this land, of those who enter without respect." I realized then the figure was not an intruder, but a spirit tied to the wilderness, protecting the secrets of the forest and snow. "Do you want me to leave?" I asked. The figure nodded slowly. "Leave before the night swallows you whole." I agreed. At dawn, I packed quickly and left the cabin behind, the forest seeming to breathe again with the rising sun. Driving away, I glanced back once, catching a glimpse of the tall figure standing among the trees, watching silently. I never returned, but the memory of that silent watcher lingers, a reminder that some places in Alaska are alive with ancient spirits who guard the wilderness, and sometimes it's best to heed their warning. I never expected Alaska to feel so alive at night. It was my first winter trip to Fairbanks, a place famous for its icy wilderness and the breathtaking northern lights dancing across the sky. I'd come with a small group of friends, all eager to experience the stark beauty and solitude that only Alaska could offer. We rented a remote cabin miles away from the nearest town, surrounded by endless forests and frozen lakes. The days were short, the sun barely peeking above the horizon, before sinking back into a long twilight. But the nights, those nights were something else entirely. On our second night, the aurora borealis painted the sky in waves of green and violet. We huddled outside the cabin, bundled in layers, marveling at the shifting colors. The air was crisp, the snow crunching beneath our boots. Then, almost as if summoned by the lights, a faint sound drifted through the trees. At first, it was barely audible, a low murmur like voices carried by the wind. We stopped talking, listening intently. "Did you hear that?" my friend Jake whispered. We all nodded. The whispers seemed to come from deeper in the forest, from where the shadows pooled between the birch and spruce. Curiosity overpowered caution. We decided to follow the sound, flashlight beams cutting through the dark as we trekked carefully into the woods. The whispers grew clearer but remained unintelligible, more like the rustling of old voices tangled in the wind, or the distant echoes of a conversation long ended. The snow muffled our footsteps, making the forest feel even more silent except for those strange murmurs. Suddenly, one of us spotted a faint glow ahead. Not the dancing aurora, but a steady, warm light, flickering between the trees. We moved closer, breath visible in the icy air. There, nestled in a small clearing, stood an old, weathered totem pole, carved with the faces of animals and spirits. The flickering light came from a small oil lamp resting at its base. I felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold. Jake reached out to touch the totem's carved faces, but the whispers swelled again, louder now, almost urgent. The air around us seemed to hum with energy. "Maybe we should go back," I said, unease creeping into my voice. Before anyone could reply, the light flickered wildly and then went out, plunging us into darkness. For a moment, the forest was utterly silent, except for the whispering, now circling us like a gentle but unyielding tide. A voice, clear and distant, floated through the trees, speaking in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow felt like a warning. We didn't linger. The cold urged us to hurry, and as we retraced our steps, the whispers faded, leaving only the crunch of snow beneath our feet. Back at the cabin, the warmth of the fire chased away the chill in my bones. I couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient was watching us, something protective, but wary of outsiders. Over the next days, we learned from the locals about the spirits of the land, the Yuit, who guard the forests, lakes, and skies. They speak through the wind and shadows, guiding travelers but warning those who disrespect the wild. We never disturbed the totem again, and each night beneath the swirling northern lights, I would sometimes hear those soft whispers riding the cold breeze, and I knew that Alaska's wilderness is alive with stories, waiting patiently beneath the stars. Alaska had always been my escape, a place where the vast wilderness swallowed you whole, and the silence was as deep as the endless forests. I moved to a small cabin near Denali National Park for the summer, craving solitude and the raw beauty of the land. My friends Sarah and Mark joined me for a week of hiking and camping, eager to share the experience. The days were long, bright with nearly 20 hours of sunlight, but the nights carried a chill and a darkness that felt like another world entirely. On our third evening, after a long hike through the dense pine forest, we settled into camp beside a frozen stream. The sky was clear, stars pricking through the deep indigo, but an eerie quiet had fallen. The usual forest sounds, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, were strangely absent. We gathered around the fire, roasting salmon and swapping stories. The crackling flames painted our faces orange and flickered against the towering trees. Suddenly, a soft whispering drifted through the pines. At first, it was indistinct, like the wind shifting in the branches. Then the whispers grew clearer, voices calling softly, almost in unison. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. Mark and I nodded, but we shrugged it off. The forest can play tricks, we told ourselves. The wind whistling through the needles, the distant call of animals. But the whispers didn't fade. We listened, straining to catch words, but it was more like a murmur. Old voices blending together, too faint to understand but impossible to ignore. "Maybe it's the spirits of the forest," Mark joked nervously. "Alaska's full of legends." I didn't laugh. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. Out of the shadows between the trees, a faint glow appeared, small and flickering like a candle's flame drifting through the dark. "Look," Sarah whispered, pointing. The light bobbed gently, weaving through the pines with a slow, deliberate rhythm. It wasn't the steady glow of a flashlight or lantern. It seemed alive, pulsing softly. "Will you check it out?" Mark asked. I hesitated, but felt an odd pull toward the light. Taking my flashlight, I stepped away from the fire, moving quietly through the underbrush. As I got closer, the whispers grew louder, soft and urgent, like a warning. The glow led me to a small clearing where ancient totems stood, weathered by time and covered in moss. The flickering light hovered near one of them, a carved figure with eyes hollow but somehow watching. The whispers surrounded me, gentle but insistent. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't alone. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, tall, cloaked in shadows, but with eyes that glowed faintly like the light. I froze. The figure raised a hand slowly, beckoning me to stay calm. Then, in a voice as soft as the breeze, it spoke. "You are welcome here, traveler, but respect the forest, for it remembers." The whispering voices swirled around me like a chorus of ancient souls. I nodded, heart pounding, unsure what to say. The figure stepped back, the glow fading with it, leaving only the stars and the whispering pines. I returned to camp, breathless but unharmed. Sarah and Mark greeted me with worried faces, but I couldn't explain what I'd seen. That night, the whispers returned, but they no longer felt threatening. They seemed like guardians, watching over the vast wilderness, protecting its secrets. Morning, the strange light was gone. The forest alive again with the familiar sounds of birds and rustling leaves. We left Denali soon after, carrying with us the memory of the whispering pines, an eerie but peaceful reminder that some parts of the wild hold ancient spirits, watching quietly from the shadows, ensuring that nothing truly bad befalls those who respect their land. I never imagined the Alaskan wilderness could feel so alive at night, not with animals or the wind, but something else, something ancient. My friend Mark and I had driven up to Denali National Park for a weekend away from the city's noise. We'd come prepared for the cold, packing tents, warm clothes, and enough food for days. The plan was simple: hike, camp under the stars, and maybe catch the northern lights dancing across the sky. The first day was perfect. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling our footsteps as we trekked deeper into the forest. The silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional call of a raven or the crunch of ice beneath our boots. We set up camp near a frozen creek just as twilight fell. The sky turned from pale blue to a deep velvet, the stars twinkling fiercely in the cold air. Mark built a fire, its warmth a small defiance against the Arctic chill. As night settled, the aurora borealis unfurled in shimmering waves overhead, green and purple curtains flickering like ghostly flames. We sat in silence, mesmerized. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind, whistling softly through the pine trees. But it wasn't wind. It was a low, murmuring sound, almost like voices, carried faintly on the crisp air. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Mark nodded, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. "It's probably some wildlife," he said, trying to sound casual. "Maybe wolves?" But the voices didn't sound like animals. They were human, whispering words I couldn't understand, weaving through the trees like a secret conversation. I stood up, straining to catch the sounds. The murmurs grew clearer, though still distant, and then suddenly stopped. The forest fell silent again. Mark laughed nervously. "You're imagining things." But I wasn't. Later, as I lay in my tent, I heard footsteps crunching outside. Not heavy, but light and careful. I zipped my sleeping bag tighter and peeked through the mesh window. Nothing moved except the flickering firelight. The next morning, I told Mark what I heard, but he shrugged it off. We decided to hike toward a nearby ridge to get a better view of the park. As we climbed, the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. This time, they seemed to come from beneath the snow. Soft voices carried up from the frozen earth. We stopped at a clearing and looked down into a small valley where the snow glistened under the bright sun. Suddenly, Mark pointed. "Look." There, near the edge of a frozen pond, a single lantern flickered, a warm, golden light swinging gently on a pole stuck in the snow. Curious, we approached cautiously. The air grew colder still, almost unnaturally. So, and the whispers swelled around us like a chant carried by the wind. Mark reached out to touch the lantern, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait." A figure stepped out from behind a cluster of trees, a woman dressed in traditional Inuit clothing, her face calm and serene despite the bitter cold. She spoke softly, in a language neither of us understood, but her meaning was clear. "You are not alone here. Respect the land. Leave before the night falls." Her eyes glowed faintly in the fading daylight, and though I felt no fear, her presence was overwhelming. Then, just as silently as she appeared, she vanished into the forest, leaving only the lantern's warm glow behind. We didn't hesitate to pack up and head back, the whispers following us until the tree line swallowed them. Back at our camp, the night was quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just the peaceful crackle of the dying fire. We never saw the woman again, but the lantern's light stayed with me, a reminder that some parts of Alaska hold ancient spirits who watch and protect, even if we cannot see them. And sometimes, when the northern lights dance overhead, I swear I hear their whispers carried on the wind, gentle warnings from a world that remains just beyond our understanding. I had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights in Alaska. The wild, endless wilderness, the silent, snowy forests, the cold air so crisp it felt like it could slice through your skin. There was something about it that called to me. So, when I finally got the chance to join a small group of friends on a remote cabin trip north of Fairbanks, I jumped at it. Our first few days were everything I imagined. The dazzling aurora swirling across the night sky in ribbons of green and purple, the endless white landscape stretching to the horizon, the quiet so complete it pressed in on you. We spent days hiking, ice fishing, and evenings in front of the cabin's wood stove, swapping stories and sipping hot coffee. On the third night, something changed. The aurora was particularly bright, painting the sky like a living, shifting painting. We were all outside, bundled up in layers, standing near the edge of the forest that surrounded the clearing where our cabin sat. I noticed it first, the faintest sound beneath the usual crackle of the fire and the whispering wind. A soft murmur, almost like voices carried on the icy breeze. I turned to the forest line, but all I saw were tall spruce and fir trees, their branches heavy with snow. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked. My friend Erin nodded slowly, her breath visible in the freezing air. "It's like whispering." We strained to listen. The sound was delicate, like hundreds of tiny voices overlapping, rising and falling in an unintelligible chorus. It wasn't human speech, more like a song, ancient and haunting. Curious and a little uneasy, I pulled my coat tighter and said, "Maybe it's the wind through the trees." But the others weren't convinced. Our host, a local named Tom, frowned. "That's not the wind, it's the kushta, the whisperers. Old legends say the spirits of the land speak beneath the aurora." I'd heard some stories about the indigenous folklore before, about spirits that roamed the forests and mountains, about the living earth and the voices carried on the wind. But I never believed them. Now, standing there in the silent cold, the whispers curling around us, I wasn't so sure. The murmurs seemed to grow louder, swirling with the lights above. The air around us felt electric, charged with an unseen presence. The northern lights danced more wildly, casting eerie shadows. On the snow, suddenly a pale figure stepped out from behind a snow-laden spruce tree. She was almost translucent, glowing faintly under the aurora's light, wrapped in what looked like furs, her long hair shimmering like frost. Her eyes were deep and dark, filled with an ancient sadness. I froze. The others gasped quietly. She didn't speak, but somehow I understood. She was a guardian, a spirit watching over the land. Tom stepped forward cautiously and bowed his head in respect. "You honor the forest and the skies, Kushta," he said softly. The figure nodded once, and then, like a ghost carried on the wind, she vanished back into the trees. The whispering stopped. The aurora settled into a gentle glow, like a lullaby for the earth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the figure, about the whispers and the living spirit of the land. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. The next morning, the forest was calm, the snow sparkling under a pale sun. The whispers were gone, but I felt the weight of the night's encounter still resting on my shoulders. I asked Tom if others had seen the spirit. He smiled sadly. "Many have, but not everyone is ready to listen. The Kushta are patient. They watch, they wait. I never forgot that night. The night the Northern Lights spoke, and the forest whispered secrets I wasn't meant to forget." We left the cabin a few days later, safe and sound, but forever changed. Alaska is wild, yes, but it's also alive in ways that can't be explained. Some say the wilderness is silent, but if you listen closely, beneath the aurora, beneath the snow, you can hear the whispers of the land, telling stories older than time. And sometimes, if you're lucky, a spirit will step out of the cold, not to harm, but to remind you that you're a guest in a place where ancient powers still linger. I had always dreamed of visiting Alaska, the vast wilderness, the endless snowfields, the towering Denali. So when my friends and I planned a winter camping trip deep in Denali National Park, I was thrilled. We wanted to experience the raw beauty of the frozen north, sleep under the northern lights, and escape the chaos of city life. We arrived just as the last orange light faded behind the mountains. The cold was immediate and sharp, each breath frosted in the air. We pitched our tents near a stand of tall pines, their dark silhouettes reaching into the indigo sky. The forest was silent, except for the soft crunch of snow beneath our boots. That first night, the aurora borealis danced overhead, shimmering green and purple ribbons that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. We sat around the fire, sharing stories and laughing, warmed by the flames and our excitement. But as the night deepened, something changed. The forest grew unnervingly quiet. The usual crackling of branches and rustle of wildlife stopped. Even the wind ceased its whisper among the pines. Then, faintly at first, I heard it, a whispering voice carried on the icy breeze. It was low and breathy, like someone murmuring, secrets just beyond hearing. I stopped talking, the hairs on my neck prickling. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but my friends shook their heads. "Must be the wind playing tricks," Mike said, handing me a cup of hot tea. "Nothing here but trees and snow." But the whispering grew louder, weaving through the trees like a cold song. It wasn't a language I understood, just a haunting melody of sibilant sounds that chilled my bones. I stood and scanned the tree line with my flashlight. For a moment, the beam caught something, a pale shape drifting silently between the trunks. My heart jumped. "Guys, I think there's someone out there," I whispered. They looked uneasy but shrugged it off as shadows and tricks of the light. Still, none of us wanted to stray far from the fire. Later, when the aurora faded and the sky turned pitch black, the whispers returned, clearer now. They seemed to circle our camp, rising and falling with the wind. Suddenly, a breeze stirred the fire, sending sparks into the night. Then I saw it, a faint glow among the pines, like a lantern bobbing through the trees. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. The glow moved closer, weaving through the branches. I could just make out the shape of a figure, tall and slender, wrapped in white furs that seemed to shimmer in the firelight. The figure stopped. At the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. I couldn't see a face, just a pale outline, but I felt eyes on me, ancient and unreadable. Then, as if carried by the wind itself, a voice whispered softly in my ear. "Leave this place before the shadows grow." Froze, the cold seeping into my bones. Not just the winter chill, but something deeper, older. "Who are you?" I asked, voice trembling. No answer. The figure melted back into the forest, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than before. We packed quickly the next morning, the uneasy feeling lingering. Before we left, a local park ranger told us a legend of the Denali Watcher, a spirit who protected the wildlands from those who would disrespect them. She was said to appear as a ghostly figure in white, guiding travelers away from danger but warning them to respect the forest. I've never forgotten that night, the whispers in the wind, the glowing figure, the warning carried on the northern breeze. We left the wilderness unharmed, but I carry the memory with me, a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, there are mysteries best left undisturbed. I've always been drawn to Alaska's wilds, the endless forests, the towering mountains, and the sense of raw, untamed nature. So when my friends and I planned a week-long cabin trip deep in the Alaskan wilderness, I couldn't resist. The cabin was tucked away miles from any road, nestled between thick pine groves and frozen lakes. It promised isolation and peace. What I didn't expect was how alive the night would feel. The first 2 days were everything I hoped. Crisp air, endless, starry skies, and the crackle of firewood in the stove. We hiked the frozen trails, spotted moose tracks, and shared stories under the aurora's dance. But as the sun sank below the horizon on our third night, something shifted. We sat outside the cabin, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot coffee. The air was sharp and still, every sound amplified in the silence. That's when I heard it, the howl. It wasn't like a wolf's cry or a coyote's call. This howl was longer, deeper, and strangely human. It echoed from the dense woods beyond, the clearing, carrying on the cold wind. My friends froze, faces pale. "Did you hear that?" Mike whispered. "It's just wolves," Sarah said, but her voice trembled. I wanted to believe that too. After all, wolves are common here. But this was different. It felt deliberate, as if something was calling us. The howl repeated, closer this time, circling around the cabin. Our fire flickered wildly, casting long shadows on the snow. I decided to stay calm. "It's probably just an animal," I said, but inside I was unsettled. That night, sleep was elusive. Every crack and creak in the cabin sounded like footsteps. Outside. I kept the flashlight close and the door locked tight. The next day, we explored the woods cautiously. The tracks we found were large and unfamiliar, too big for any known animal, with strange claw marks and a dragging pattern, as if something heavy had been pulled along the ground. "What made these?" I asked, shivering despite the heavy jacket. No one had answers. We decided to stick close to the cabin. That evening, as twilight settled, the howl returned. But this time, it was joined by whispers. Soft, almost inaudible voices carried on the wind through the pine trees. "Voices?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. I nodded. I heard them too. We huddled by the fire, straining to catch the whispers. The words were in a language none of us recognized. Ancient, maybe. The voices rose and fell like a chant, weaving through the cold, night air. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. Our breaths became visible, frost forming on the grass. Then I saw it. At the edge of the clearing, where the forest met the open snowfield, a figure stood, tall, cloaked in shadow, its form barely visible against the dark trees. I blinked, heart pounding. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Mike nodded. "What is it?" The figure didn't move, but seemed to watch us. The whispers grew louder, then faded, replaced by the mournful howl once again. We stood frozen, neither daring to approach nor to run. Minutes passed like hours. Then the figure slowly dissolved into the mist rising from the frozen ground. The howl stopped. A heavy silence settled over the forest. We looked at each other, shaken but unharmed. "I think we just met the spirit of the woods," Sarah said softly. I agreed. The ancient pines, the endless snow, the chilling voices, they felt like a message, a warning, or maybe a greeting from something that belongs to this wild place long before we ever came. The next morning, the strange tracks were gone, erased by fresh snow and wind. The whispers and howls never returned. We packed up and left, the cabin fading behind us into the vast wilderness. I never forgot that night. The howl beyond the pines, the shadow watching silently, and the eerie voices whispering secrets carried by the wind. Somewhere deep in Alaska's frozen forests, something ancient still stirs, watching, waiting, and howling beneath the endless sky. I had always dreamed of visiting Alaska. The vast wilderness, the snow-capped mountains, the endless forests that stretch beyond the horizon. When my friend Lucas invited me on a week-long trip near Denali National Park, I didn't hesitate. We wanted to experience the true rawness of the North, camp beneath the stars, and maybe catch a glimpse of the northern lights. Our first few days passed in a blur of beauty and quiet wonder. We hiked frozen trails, watched moose lumber through the brush, and marveled at the sky's colors as daylight stretched into endless twilight. But it was on the fourth night that the atmosphere shifted, and something unexplainable crept into our wilderness adventure. We had set up camp near a frozen lake, surrounded by towering spruce and fir trees heavy with snow. The temperature plunged, well below zero, the kind of cold that bites deep and steals warmth from your bones. The sky was clear, and the aurora borealis painted curtains of green and purple light overhead, a stunning spectacle that made the chill almost worth it. As we sat by the fire sipping hot cocoa and swapping stories, I noticed an odd silence settle over the forest. The usual night sounds, the crackling ice, distant howls, and rustling branches had faded into nothingness. The woods around us felt unnaturally still, as if holding their breath. "Do you hear that?" I asked Lucas, peering into the darkness beyond our campfire's glow. "Hear what?" he replied, turning to look. A faint whisper, almost too soft to catch. It was like the wind weaving through the trees, but there was a rhythm, a pattern, a low murmur threading beneath the silence. We fell quiet, straining to listen. The whispers grew clearer. Soft voices in an unfamiliar language, layered with the hush of snow falling gently on the forest floor. Suddenly, a pale green glow flickered at the edge of the tree line, separate from the northern lights. It pulsed, rhythmically, like a heartbeat in the night. Curiosity outweighed caution. I grabbed my flashlight and Lucas followed, both of us drawn toward the eerie glow that hovered just beyond the tree line. As we approached, the whispering voices swirled around us, weaving between the trees like a living thing. The cold seemed to deepen, a biting frost settling on our skin despite our layers. The light came from a strange object half buried in the snow, a carved wooden totem, unlike anything I'd seen before. It depicted a figure with a wide face, hollow eyes, and arms reaching skyward. The green glow emanated from cracks in the wood, pulsing like it held a life of its own. "Looks like some kind of old native artifact," Lucas said, voice hushed. "But why is it glowing?" Before I could answer, the whispers crescendoed into a chorus of voices, filling the air with a haunting melody, a song that seemed to echo through time itself. I felt a strange calm wash over me, like the totems. Glow was weaving a protective spell around us. The voices weren't malevolent. Instead, they spoke of ancient guardians, spirits watching over the land and its people. Suddenly, the aurora above flared brighter, casting ghostly shadows through the forest. The totem's glow faded slowly, the whispers retreating like a tide, withdrawing from the shore. We stood there for a long moment, hearts pounding but unharmed, surrounded by a silence deeper than before. "We should head back," Lucas said finally, voice steady but quiet. On the way back, the forest returned to normal. The crackle of ice, distant calls of wildlife, the comforting rustle of wind through trees. Back at camp, I lay in my sleeping bag staring at the ceiling of the tent. The memory of the glowing totem and those ancient voices lingering like a dream I couldn't shake. The next morning, we found no sign of the totem where we'd seen it. The snow was undisturbed, and the forest looked as if untouched by anything supernatural. We never spoke much about that night, but I know what I heard and saw. In the vast Alaskan wilderness, ancient spirits watch over their land, whispering secrets to those who listen. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they let you glimpse their light. I left Alaska with a story no one believed, but I carry the memory of those glowing whispers beneath the northern lights, a reminder that some mysteries are better left untouched, and some guardians watch silently from the shadows, keeping the wild safe. I never imagined that a trip to Alaska would turn into a night I wouldn't forget, not because of anything bad, but because of how the wild here holds its secrets. I was there for a winter retreat, eager to see the northern lights, enjoy the silence of the snow-covered forests, and disconnect from city life. What I found was something far stranger. I arrived in a small town called Talkeetna, a sleepy place nestled between mountains and forests. It was early December, and the sun barely rose above the horizon, casting a pale glow over the endless white landscape. The cold bit through my jacket as I unpacked in a cozy cabin rented through a local outfitter. My plan was simple: spend days hiking nearby trails and nights watching the aurora dance above the wilderness. On my third evening, I decided to take a walk along a frozen river just outside town. The air was sharp and clear, and the snow crunched underfoot. The sky was alive with swirling green and purple ribbons of the northern lights, absolutely mesmerizing. As I walked deeper into the forest lining the river, I noticed the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was like the world was holding its breath. No birds, no rustling animals, only the crackling of ice beneath my boots. Suddenly, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A dark figure standing just beyond the tree line, watching me. I froze, my breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The figure didn't move. It wasn't a bear or moose, far too tall and thin, standing perfectly still like a statue. I strained to see its face, but it was hidden in shadow. My heart pounded, but I reminded myself that this was Alaska. People sometimes camp or hike late, and the dark woods played tricks on the eyes. I took a few steps closer, and the figure vanished. Not running away, but simply gone, as if swallowed by the night. Unease settled in my chest. I turned to head back, but noticed something strange. A series of faint, glowing footprints in the snow. They were too small to be animal tracks, perfectly spaced, leading deeper into the woods. Curious and cautious, I followed them. The glowing footprints led me along the riverbank until they stopped at a small frozen pond. The air around the pond felt colder, almost electric. The northern lights shimmered brighter above, casting ghostly colors on the ice. Then I heard it, a whisper carried on the wind, barely audible but unmistakably there. The voice was ancient, speaking in a language I didn't understand, filled with longing and warning. I shivered but stayed rooted, the whispers growing clearer. Suddenly, the ice beneath me glowed with a soft blue light, and the whispers became a chorus. Shapes emerged beneath the surface, translucent figures drifting beneath the frozen pond, their faces peaceful yet mournful. One spirit rose slowly through the ice, its form shimmering in the aurora's glow. It didn't speak, but bowed its head toward me, a silent plea. I understood then. These were the lost souls of the river, people who had perished in the cold, trapped beneath the ice but somehow still tied to the land. The spirit's eyes met mine, filled with sorrow but no malice. It was a guardian of the frozen wilderness, reminding me to respect the harsh beauty of this place. With a gentle gust, the spirit melted back beneath the ice, and the glowing footprints faded. I took a deep breath and turned toward the cabin, the northern lights still dancing overhead. I never told anyone about that night. The locals only smile knowingly when I mention the whispers beneath the lights. They say the spirits are always watching, keeping the wilderness safe. And now I believe them. Alaska isn't just wild. It's alive with stories, voices, and secrets that only reveal themselves to those who listen carefully in the stillness of a winter night. Alaska is a place of extremes, beauty and brutality entwined beneath the vast sky. I grew up hearing stories about its wildness, but nothing prepared me for the night I spent far from civilization, under the eerie glow of the aurora borealis. I was on a solo camping trip deep in the Denali wilderness. The plan was simple. Hike in, set up camp near an old ranger's cabin marked on the map, and spend a couple of nights soaking in the raw silence and the endless stars. I'd never felt more alive, or more alone. The day was cold but clear as the sun dipped below the horizon. The northern lights began their slow dance, ghostly curtains of green and violet swirling across the sky. I set up my tent near the cabin ruins, the wood rotting and sagging, a skeleton of a place long abandoned. It was the perfect spot, isolated but sheltered. The air was crisp, each breath sharp and white in the lantern light. I built a small fire, the crackle and snap comforting against the vast, overwhelming quiet. As the night deepened, I heard it, a faint whispering carried by the wind, almost too soft to notice. At first, I thought it was just the wind through the trees, but it didn't sound natural. It was almost like voices, soft, urgent, calling out in a language I couldn't understand. I froze. The aurora flickered overhead, lighting the sky like some ancient cosmic fire. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere, around the cabin, the trees, the frozen ground itself. Curious and a little unnerved, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside the tent. The cold bit at my skin, but I felt drawn toward the sound. I followed the whispers into the darkness, my light cutting a narrow path through the dense spruce and birch. The voices rose and fell, a haunting chorus that wrapped around me like a fog. Ahead, I saw a faint glow, a small lantern swinging gently near the edge of a frozen creek. I moved closer, heart pounding, and saw a figure standing on the bank. A woman dressed in traditional Athabascan clothing, her face pale and eyes reflecting the lantern's flicker. She didn't speak, but gestured for me to come closer. The whispers softened, and the air seemed to still. "Who are you?" I whispered. She raised her hand and pointed toward the aurora. I understood. These were not just lights in the sky, but voices, spirits of the land reaching out. Suddenly, a cold wind blew, and the woman vanished like smoke. The whispers faded to silence, replaced by the steady crunch of snow beneath my boots. I returned to my tent, shaken but unharmed, the northern lights still weaving their silent stories above. The next day, I met a local hunter who told me about the wind singers, spirits who guard the wilderness, guiding lost souls but warning those who disrespect the land. I felt lucky to have seen her, the guardian of the northern night. That night, under the shimmering sky, the whispers never came back, but I still felt watched, not with menace but with the quiet vigilance of the wild itself.